Breaking into tech isn't easy, especially when you're struggling to afford the education you need to get there. But today's guest didn't let financial challenges stop him. He found a way to learn, upskill, and land his first tech job against the odds. In this episode, he shares his incredible journey from overcoming financial struggles to becoming a DevOps engineer, the cool Kubernetes project he worked on that took his skills to the next level, and the lessons he learned after being made redundant, including how you can prepare if you ever face job loss in tech. This conversation is packed with real-world advice, resilience, and career-changing insights. So stick around because you won't want to miss this one. Let's dive in. Hello, Razeen. Welcome to the show. Can you tell the audience sort of what your current job title is and what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Hi, Fayomi. Nice to speak with you today. So my job title is DevOps engineer, and what I do on a day-to-day basis is work with the cloud. So AWS is the main cloud provider I use, manage infrastructure using Terraform and Ansible. I also help out the development team with any issues they're having with pipelines and those sort of things, basically making the developers' jobs easier for them. And those would sort of be the main responsibilities. Obviously, it's a very broad thing to cover, but yeah, just making sure the apps are always serviceable and running. If there's any issues, sorting them out.
Yeah, no, that sounds really good. I know you're in the cloud industry now, but as we like to do in this show, we usually go way back to the very beginning before you got a job in tech. What job were you doing before you decided to make that transition?
Okay, so my journey is a bit different than maybe the other guests you've had, but so I always wanted to get into maybe not cloud, but tech. Into tech, I always wanted to get into since I was in school, really. So I did go through that path of doing a degree in computer science and then getting my first graduate role. And I think the part that would be more pertinent to your audience is what happened after. So after I landed my first role, as a graduate, I was working with the cloud, obviously, in that role as well. But then during the COVID bubble was when I got that role. And so after once all of these companies realized that, oh, we've sort of overhired and sort of the redundancies started to come through. And then it was in November 2023 when I was made redundant. And I was looking for a new role for about 9 months. I think if I sort of went for a more entry level role, I probably could have found something a bit quicker, but I sort of didn't want to reset from where I was. I'd been with the company for almost 22 months. And so, yeah, that sort of time I think was it was challenging for me, yeah. And there were times as well where I was thinking about like sort of just leave all this tech stuff and go work in retail or something like that. It would just be easier. But yeah, praise be to God, I continued on with this journey and managed to land a new role.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that because it must have been such a trying time because obviously you'd already got some experience in the industry, then you got made redundant. Like, can you walk us through maybe some of the things you were doing while you were redundant to upskill yourself, or maybe how often
Mhm.
you were applying for jobs, just to give people
Yep,
a taste of what that was like?
yep. So sort of went through different phases. The first phase up for me, obviously, was when I heard I was being made redundant. Was like sort of at the time I didn't have a CV ready because I thought my job was fairly secure. But obviously now with the current economy, I'd advise everyone like have your CV ready at all times. But so first stage was getting my CV ready and then just sending out as many applications as possible. And then I realized once I started doing that there were quite a few gaps in my knowledge. So I was getting to interviews and they was asking me about certain things, and there was gaps that needed to be filled. So I spent the remainder of my time at the previous company learning to fill these gaps, doing helping out people on other projects and things like that that could help me to fill those gaps. And then
What sort of
once,
gaps? What sort of gaps did you realize you had?
so in terms of fully understanding networking is something that I studied at university, but I didn't really have practical experience in terms of setting up, I'd say like um, IP address ranges and things like that, keeping it within the private reserved addresses and setting up CIDR blocks. those sort of things. Maybe a little bit of Linux. I did have a bit of exposure to Linux, but I think that was an area as well that I needed to really strengthen before looking for a new role. So in that first sort of stage, I managed to like find out what areas were weak, and then I started to work on those, but also slowly continued applying. And then, as you know, in December, there's not a lot of roles around. Um, Recruiting is pretty quiet in December and January as well. Things start to pick up once the New Year's fully kicked in. So in that time, I did sort of take on a few courses on Linux and networking and things like this, just to make sure the foundations and the fundamentals are very solid. Um,
Yeah, just to add to that as well, I love the fact that even though you already had experience in the industry, you still kept upskilling yourself, like you mentioned, with the networking skills and with the Linux skills, and these are some of the things we talk about because in the cloud industry, there's always the expectation where you continue learning, and I just want to let this be known to sort of the listeners who are maybe beginners who might feel like, oh yeah, once I get my job, that's it, no more learning. And I think just building in that habit of learning consistently, improving your skills, improving your competency is always a good way to go. And also, I want to highlight something you said about not having when you were in work, you didn't really have your CV up to date. And this is something I advise people who are already in the cloud industry. Like what I recommend is to keep what I call a brag book. So a brag book is basically like a document where if you complete a project or if you do anything, just make a note of it in like a bullet point or two. And that way, in the future, it serves two purposes actually. The first purpose is that with a lot of work in the cloud industry, there's a lot of imposter syndrome. Maybe you feel like you're not good enough or things like that. What you can do is that you can look back on your brag book and see, oh wow, I've done this project, I've done that project, I've actually done quite a lot because you're doing stuff all the time, so it's easy to forget. The second benefit of a brag book is that when it comes time to update your CV, like you have all the things you've done like ready to go, so you can just update your resume or your CV
yeah.
directly.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I've been doing. I don't think I called it a brag book. It was more of a journaling sort of thing. So every day I'd sort of write down what, like we do in stand up, of course, already is say what your goals are for the day. But then obviously you do deviate from that plan fairly regularly, especially in DevOps, given that things can come up. So what I'd do is just journal down everything that I've done during the day and then take out the most important points, obviously, when it's time to write my CV.
Yeah, no, that's a really good tip. Shifting gears a little bit, when we were sort of chatting before the interview, you mentioned that one of the struggles you faced at, university was with dyslexia and or dyspraxia. Can you maybe talk a bit about how that affected you, why and how you got diagnosed and what the impact of that was? Are you tired of getting ghosted by recruiters, sending out dozens of applications only to hear nothing back? I know it's frustrating, but it doesn't have to be your story. The problem isn't your potential, it's your approach. In our program at cloudcareermentor.com, you get a tried and tested learning framework that has helped dozens of cloud beginners break into the cloud industry. You build impressive high quality projects using Linux, AWS, Terraform, CI/CD, and more that demonstrate your expertise and catches the attention of recruiters. We'll also teach you how to write a standout resume and craft your LinkedIn profile. And you'll also learn how to interview like a pro, which would help impress hiring managers. And you won't be doing it alone. With our supportive community, personalized mentorship, and structured learning plan, you get the guidance you need to succeed. No more ghostings, no more rejections. Go to cloudcareermentor.com and start your dream journey today.
Yeah, so this was something that I was experiencing from fairly young, like young years and stuff like that. But and it was brought up to like even in primary school and things like that. But the the ultimatum they came to was sort of like I'm not speaking English at home as my first language, which is why I'm having slower reading speed, and these are some of the symptoms that are associated with dyslexia or dyspraxia. And then so fast forward to when I'm sitting my exams like GCSEs, A levels, I'm finding that I'm finding it really difficult to complete the exams within the allotted time. So I think it was only like a couple of maths exams out of all of the GCSE and A level exams that I sat that I was able to finish within the given time. The rest of them had at least one or two questions that didn't get around to actually writing an answer for. So obviously
Mm.
that was an indicator to me that like this isn't normal compared to my peers, and I didn't know what it was fully, but obviously there was some people in my family as well because it is hereditary as well. So my auntie, she in her later she's went to university later on, and she got her diagnosis, and then she suggested to me as well, if you're having this problem, you should go and get a diagnosis yourself as well. Once you're in uni, it will be a lot easier than at A level. They don't really have the schools don't really have that sort of funding. So when I went to uni, I spoke to the disability or I think it's special learning assistant team, something like that. So I spoke to them, and they were able to help me out and get me the diagnosis. And that really helped me in terms of getting extra time for my exams and also understanding as well more about my condition and what I can do to mitigate it and what there are benefits, upsides to it and downsides as well. It's not like it's just downsides. Like my cognitive speed, it would be higher than the average for my peer group, but with the sacrifice of my reading speed being slightly slower.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. I'm sure a lot of people will be able to relate with that experience. I think one of the other things we spoke about was, because you're Muslim, and to go through university, you couldn't take out loans because of the interest. Yeah, can you talk us through what the problem was in that and how you overcame
Yeah,
that?
yeah, okay. So obviously, in Islam, there's a lot of topics and there's a lot of differences of opinion, especially when it comes to day to day things. And one of those is taking out an interest bearing loan for university. And so some people say it's okay, some people say you're not allowed to do it. For myself, I found that if there's a way for me to avoid it, I should avoid it. And thankfully, I was able to find a way to avoid it, not only through my own efforts, but through the help of and assistance of my family as well. So that's something that I'm really grateful for my brothers, my parents. They were able to assist me financially, and that's not a situation that everyone has. But I was fortunate enough to be in that situation, and as well, I was spending summers working, weekends working, even weekdays that I had off. I was working as well, just doing anything I could. I had a range of jobs from like warehouse moving stuff around in a warehouse, delivery driver, uh, stewarding. Stewarding is something that I kept on, and it helped me out a lot when I was made redundant as well. So I became a stewarding supervisor after I graduated. I became a stewarding supervisor, and then I sort of kept that role. And when I was made redundant, that really helped me out quite a bit. But yeah, so there was a lot of different roles, tuition, yeah, just a lot of different things going on, and was able to make it through university, paying my way through as I went.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that because I think this is going to apply to a lot of people because there might be someone, watching now who maybe they want to invest in their education, their technological education, but they feel they can't afford it. And I think just having the shift of, okay, what can you do to afford it? Like you mentioned, you lean heavily on like family and friends. They supported, sorry, your family members who supported you, but you also, were working in the evenings, weekends, even weekdays, and even when you were made redundant, you still like kept yourself afloat by doing stewarding jobs. And this is the kind of thing that some people might think is beneath them. Like, oh, I've already got a job as a cloud engineer. Why do I need to go back? But I think it's so important to like stabilize yourself financially before you can move
Mm,
forward. So I think for those who maybe, even if they're not Muslim, even if not everyone can maybe get a loan or anything like that. So
yeah,
I like your example of just finding ways to make your goals happen rather than just maybe just giving up. So really
mhm,
thanks for sharing that. Um,
yeah. There was one other thing I wanted to highlight as well in terms of like there are other avenues rather than just going to uni. Obviously, you have companies like yourself, Cloud Career Mentor, that can help you upskill and get into a role directly. Or there are other avenues as well. If you've done your A levels, you can go into a degree apprenticeship, and stuff like this wasn't very well signposted to me when I was in my A levels. So I make a point of trying to signpost it to people who are in that sort of age bracket or in that sort of area where they have these opportunities open to them. It's not just university, there's other avenues you can pursue as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. One of the things I want to talk about is, your role now as a, cloud engineer, a DevOps engineer. And what I want to do is give people a flavor of what that role entails. So if you can you talk about, maybe not in your current role or maybe in a previous role, it's up to you, but just one of like the projects you've worked on. Maybe you can start with what the scenario was, and then what you did and what the outcome was. And yeah, you can generalize it as much as you can.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to choose a Kubernetes project. So there's going to be a lot of different tools that maybe not a lot of your audience will be familiar with.
Sounds
So
good.
in Kubernetes, there is a tool called Carpenter. What Carpenter does, it basically auto scales your nodes or the things that run the Kubernetes pods. So with Carpenter, they released a new version 1, and my task essentially was to upgrade from the current version we're using to version 1. Now, we also had another tool within Kubernetes called Flux CD, and what that does is a GitOps tool. So it looks at our repository and then makes any changes to any of the tools within Kubernetes. And so Carpenter was within Flux, and because it was a version 1 upgrade, they were making a lot of changes to Carpenter in terms of like webhooks instead of uh, using webhooks instead of the way they were currently doing it. So there was various different things changing, custom resource definitions, updating, and things like that. And the usage of Flux just made it very overcomplicated. The upgrade process was way, way more overcomplicated than it needed to be. So what I had done was I rebuilt the cluster, removed Flux from it. So just put in the Helm definition files myself in Terraform and applied them like that, and got Carpenter upgraded to version 1. And with this change, Flux basically tipped our cluster over a critical point where we needed 2 nodes instead of 1, and we needed a slightly larger node. So in our base node usage, it was reduced by 75% as a result of me making this change of removing Flux and just keeping it simple with Terraform.
Have you ever considered getting a job in the cloud industry? Do you feel frustrated because you feel overwhelmed by all the technologies you need to learn and are not sure just where to begin? Well, I've got good news. I've created a free guide called The 3 Simple Steps to Your First Cloud Job that will walk you through exactly what you need to do to get a well-paid job in the cloud industry. In this guide, I walk you through the simple plan you can follow to improve your chances of securing that cloud job offer. The free guide has helped hundreds of people from all over the world, and I'm sure it will help you too. Make sure you download it now. The link is in the description below. Let's get back to the show. Wow, that's pretty impressive. And I know, that sounds easy, but that must have taken a long time and a lot of research to make happen.
A lot of planning. Yeah, it sounds very simple now, but yeah, a lot of planning, a lot of headache trying to troubleshoot different things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Like just thinking about your journey, actually, I think I'm thinking this is probably going to be titled "How to Deal with Redundancy" because I think this is something that in this climate now we're hearing a lot of layoffs happening where people are scared for their jobs. So, what are some tips you'd give to someone? Let's say they're working a job now. How should they prepare for the potential of redundancy? Like, what would you advise?
Obviously, you always want to have a positive outlook and sort of give your all for the job you're doing. And that's the best way to sort of secure your current job, is if you're doing the job. I know it sounds a bit selfish, but if you're doing the job better than your peers, the company won't want to let you go. They'll look at it and see that you're the best guy for the job, so they'll keep you. And in terms of preparing for that, the event where you do get made redundant is, as we've mentioned before, always have your CV ready. Always have your CV ready. And I'd say as well, go a step forward. Always keep not actively applying, keep actively looking. Keep an eye on the market, see what's available, see what the salary ranges are. And that way as well, you can see if you're being fairly paid for your work. So those are the 2 kind of main things. Just keep your interview skills sharp. And so keep your connections good as well. Speak to recruiters, speak to hiring managers, and then if you have a relationship with them, if there's a role available and you're out of work, it should be a lot easier to land that new role.
Also, those are some good advice, and I'll throw in a bonus one as well. Like if you're in a situation where you're in work right now, make sure you're keeping savings in your bank account, so that if anything
Mm,
happens, you have a good runway of, money that you can keep going until you
yeah.
find your next opportunity.
Yeah, that's
No, that
another very important thing to manage your finance as well before redundancy as well. Have that sort of buffer zone as you mentioned, and as well you can don't be afraid to ask your family if you're in a situation where you need money. You can ask your family if you have that support network, and if not, just try and do anything you can to sort of make ends meet. Like in terms of, I went into tuition, doing all sorts of other odd jobs here and there, but just enough to keep you afloat, like buying stuff and reselling stuff, just finding stuff for cheap and reselling it and things like that. That's all stuff that can help you along your way, um, to keeping yourself financially afloat.
those are great tips. And the majority of people who listen to this podcast are maybe people who are working in maybe non-technical fields who want to get a job in the cloud. What's the one piece of advice you give to that person who's thinking, oh, a job in tech sounds cool, like how can I do it? What advice would you give to that person?
So I know there's a lot of people who think about this move and they just don't take action. They just think about it and they just put it off. And it's like that with a lot of things in life, really. It's just take that first step, start learning that thing, make a commitment. If you go for a free course, you need to be 100% committed. You need to have that self motivation, that self drive. If you know you don't have that, put your money where your mouth is, pay for something, and then you'll have that sort of in the back of your mind, like, look, I've paid for this. I need to start learning this. I need to start making a move. I need to change my situation. I need to start this change.
Yeah, I think having that self motivation is so, so important. And even that accountability as well to like, okay, I need to do this. I need to keep moving forward. No, these are such good advice. And I'm sure like my audience is going to get so much insight from this. So you've been very generous with your time. If people want to reach out, say hello and, maybe ask you one or two questions, would LinkedIn be the best place to reach out?
Yeah, LinkedIn would be the best place. And I'd say connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on LinkedIn. There are a few things that I'm working on in terms of trying to help out people who are trying to get into tech, or people who are very early in this stage of their tech careers, just to sort of give back to the community, because I've had a lot of help from other people within the community, to help me to get to where I am. So I feel that onus to help out others. So yeah, feel very free to reach out to me. I'll help you as much as I can.
That's great. I'm sure a lot of people will take you up on that offer. And yeah, I'm excited to see what you launch. But in the meantime, thank you so much for coming. And yeah, we'll talk later.